Good morning, lovely people. It's Professor Matt, and this is the Too Many Guys Soccer podcast. And this is a kind of impromptu short. It's sort of a short before short because I was hoping before the kickoff of the World Cup to record something on Iran, the Iranian Revolution, and football. Uh, but this week something came up, and I'm sure we're going to mention this on the pod proper, but I thought I would dedicate, 10, 15 minutes or so to just discuss it. The chief executive of Shakhtar Donetsk, a fellow by the name of Sergei Palkin, said something really crazy earlier in the week. He suggested that Iran, and we'll talk about this, should be thrown out of the World Cup. He listed a whole bunch of reasons why, more about that in a second, and that their place should be taken by Ukraine. Anyone who's watched or listened to the podcast knows where I stand on, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and where my loyalties, allegiances, sympathies, lie. But I have to be honest. This suggestion is problematic on so many levels, and we'll get into that in a second. Uh, First, let's get to the question of Iran and Iran getting thrown out. Uh, Iran is, let's be honest, on the West shit list at the moment, and they've been on the West shit list really since 1979. Uh, and right, Iran and Russia over the last decade, for better or for worse, have a strategic partnership, mainly designed to block us, the United States, uh, in the Middle East and in the Caucasus, etc. Plotkin has accused Iran of providing the Russian drones, of which, by the way, I don't doubt for a second. Uh, he also said something in terms of, Iranian troops were in Crimea and on the ground. This is news to me. It's rather suspect. The United States, some sources claim this to be the case. Most European sources say there's no evidence at all. So that doesn't seem to hold water. And right, I mean, at the moment in Iran, we're seeing these large anti-government protests, a crackdown, and right, if you've been following, football-related news, there is a Spanish soccer fan who has been walking to Qatar. I don't know why the hell you did that, but he did. That's been arrested in Iran. Which isn't cool, but at the same time, I do have to question why you would walk through Iran to get to Qatar to get to the World Cup. I don't think Byron Rob's doing something like that. Should Iran get thrown out? It's tough. I would I would caution no, and the reason I would caution no is as follows: Iran is cooperating. They still trade with, again, they have this strategic partnership with Russia. And Russia, deservingly so, has been thrown the hell out of this World Cup and any competition in the foreseeable future. But here's the thing. In the 1970s and 1980s, South Africa, apartheid South Africa, was banned from international sporting competitions. But anyone who knows anything about the history of Southern Africa, the history of the Cold War, knows apartheid South Africa was aided and abetted by the United States, Great Britain, Portugal, Israel, for a variety of reasons, be it, Cold War politics. They were even aided by certain sub-Saharan African black countries. Zaire under Mobutu was essentially a partner in, apartheid. If we kick Iran out because they are Russia adjacent, we are setting a really, really, really problematic, in my estimation anyway, example. Because, right, two-thirds of the world, whether we like it or not, still does business with Vladimir Putin, right? And so if we kick Iran out, the obvious next step is we throw China out, we throw India out, we throw Pakistan out, we throw pretty much all of sub-Saharan Africa and a good chunk of Latin America. And right, look, this whole sports is above politics. That's nonsense. We all know that's fraudulent. But I believe that sports should not be used or weaponized as a political weapon. Uh, and some of you who are listening or watching are like, well, what does that make sense? Because, this Professor Matt has said he has wanted, Israel to be banned from competitions. Yeah, because of their actual apartheid in the occupied territories of Palestine, for what they actually do. I'm not suggesting that the United States, which is the largest, backer of Israel, economically, militarily, diplomatically, should also be banned because they are Israel adjacent. So I'm clear here. What what Iran is doing, both at home and abroad, is not great. But unless you can prove to me that there are Iranian troops on the ground, uh, and they're not just selling the Russians drones, then we can't really do this because this sets a crazy precedent. Right? Because by this logic, going back to my example of South Africa, one third of the planet should have been thrown out of every sporting competition in the 70s and the 80s because they, in one way, shape, or form, be it buying diamonds, in the case of the United States, selling weapons to Israel that then got resold for South Africa, one third of the planet would be banned. So I don't think Iran should be banned, at least at the moment. The other part of this that is hella problematic is the assumption that if you do ban Iran, Ukraine automatically takes that spot. No, no. I mean, I would love to see my boys in the World Cup. You guys know that. For my own personal enjoyment, but also for, again, morale, support. The information war, which football is part of, football and politics. But let's be real. Iran had nothing to fricking do with Ukraine not being in the World Cup. The reason Ukraine is not in the World Cup is because Gareth Bale and the Welsh said what's up in the qualifying playoffs. It's that simple. And even if you did throw Iran out, that spot would have to, I would assume, go to the next Asian team, which is the UAE. You can't take out an Asian team and replace it with a European team. That it's not how it works. A lot of my friends from the global south have, referred to the World Cup as the colonizers' cup anyway, right? Because European teams get the most spots, as opposed to African or Asian countries. So if you take Iran out and you place it with another European country, so Europe gets an extra spot, what kind of message does that send the global south, who, for a whole bunch of reasons which are beyond the scope of this little, micro episode, have a weird view of the conflict in Ukraine, mainly because they remember imperialism, and they don't necessarily, when they understand when Washington, London, and France, and Berlin, and Rome start talking about human rights and stuff. It's somewhat conditional. Let's just say that. So by taking Iran, an Asian country, a country which, hey, the regime there isn't great, but their track record on things like, global South development, decolonization, actually pretty good. And who are punished because mainly their foreign policy doesn't sync well with the West. And then you replace them with the European team. Yeah, that doesn't look good at all. That sends a horrible, horrible message. Uh, and it opens up the door to all kinds of crazy stuff because literally 24 hours after Mr. Plotkin opened his mouth, the UN ambassador Paolo Zampoli also decided to weigh in on the situation and said Iran should be thrown out, but they shouldn't be replaced by Ukraine. They should be replaced by Italy. Ah, that's crazy. And that's why this makes me very, very queasy and very, very uncomfortable. Politics and sport and diplomacy, they go together like bacon and eggs, whether we like it or not. And right, I'm not a fan of this whole sport and politics don't mesh, therefore you can be awful and still do sport. Russia has been thrown out of this competition for a freaking reason. But once you start targeting regimes, nations that are adjacent, let's say, to an out and out perpetrator, the situation Russia to Iran, or to be honest, regimes that you just don't like, then we're running a very slippery slope. We're sending a really crap message to the global south where we don't have a particularly good track record anyway. And we open up the door to shenanigans like, Signor Zampoli's suggestion that, well, you know what, you start Iran and Italy, which, the reason the Italians aren't there is because of the Italians. That they should enter the tournament. This is really potentially dangerous, and this is bad. And the thing is, too, there's also a bit of disingenuousness about it because, okay, yes, Iran is a human rights violator. Yes, Iran is friends with Putin. Newsflash: there's a lot of human rights violators. There's a lot of dictators at this World Cup. The host nation being the most obvious, but like Saudi Arabia, uh, we'll see what happens in the election runoff, but like Brazil, clown boy in Brazil. So this runs the risk of not just, making the World Cup even more the colonizers' cup, but also potentially, the World Cup and, World Cup places just being reserved for nations that the West likes and nations that the West likes that are equally, if not more so, crappy when it comes to things like human rights, when it comes to things like development, etc. Saudi Arabia is straight up bombing Yemen and turning the entire country into a giant concentration camp. No one is suggesting Saudi Arabia should be thrown out of the World Cup. Pot calling the kettle black, maybe. So yeah, this runs a very dangerous slope. And like I said, you guys all know where I stand. I would love to have seen Ukraine at this World Cup. Russia is out of this World Cup and deservingly so. Am I a big fan of, what Iran's doing in that part of the world? No, no, I'm not. But I also don't think they should be expelled from the World Cup and replaced, and in this case, replaced by a European or maybe another European nation that is not in the tournament based on their own merit. Ukraine is not in the World Cup because of Iran or even necessarily because of Russia. They're not in the World Cup because Gareth Bale decided to show up, right? Let's be real, guys. Anyway, uh, hope everyone is well, and I'll see you guys on the main pod soon. This is Professor Matt, and this is the Too Many Guys Soccer Podcast. Peace.